There is a certain fantasy that lives inside the wounded empath, and it is one of the most dangerous fantasies the psyche can invent. It is the fantasy that healing will make you softer, kinder, endlessly forgiving, more available, more radiant, more harmless. It imagines healing as a kind of spiritual perfume, something that makes you pleasant to be around, something that removes your thorns, something that turns your pain into sweetness for other people to consume. But the unconscious does not heal you in order to make you agreeable. The unconscious heals you in order to make you whole, and wholeness, as you are now beginning to discover, is not comfortable, it is not sentimental, it does not exist to maintain the emotional economy of those who have grown accustomed to your self-erasure. So let us speak plainly, as we would in a late-night seminar when the mask of politeness has been taken off and the room is finally ready for truth. What a healed empath becomes is not the good one who keeps suffering quietly, who keeps understanding everyone, who keeps turning inward the blame and outward the compassion. No, healing does not perfect your role. Healing dissolves your role. That is the uncomfortable truth. The empath, as a psychological identity, is often not an essence, but a pattern, an adaptation, a strategy, a sacred disguise. It is frequently the child's solution to an environment that was emotionally chaotic. If I can feel everything, I can predict everything. If I can anticipate everyone, I can avoid punishment. If I can carry the pain, maybe love will stay. The empath becomes the household's weather system, measuring invisible atmospheres, translating moods, soothing storms, and in that long apprenticeship, sensitivity becomes fused with survival. But the self, the deeper wholeness that hides beneath your persona, does not want you to survive forever. It wants you to live. And the shift from survival to life is the most terrifying transformation the psyche can undergo. Because survival keeps you in familiar suffering, life demands that you become unknown, even to those who once claimed they knew you best. When healing begins in earnest, the first thing it does is not make you stronger, it makes you quieter, and this quiet is not depression, it is not withdrawal from life, it is an inner relocation. It is the psyche pulling its energy back from the external field, back from the endless scanning of others, back from the compulsive reading of subtext, back from the reflex to rescue. The healed empath becomes less interpretive. You stop translating everyone's behavior into excuses. You stop calling cruelty trauma. You stop calling manipulation misunderstanding. You stop calling neglect busyness. This is a death, and it is not dramatic like tragedy. It is silent like winter. Your old emotional vocabulary begins to fail. The old stories no longer work. And the people who relied on those stories, those who benefited from your constant reinterpretation, begin to feel a strange panic, though they cannot name it. Because the empath, unhealed, is the perfect mirror for other people's unconsciousness. You reflect them in a flattering way, a forgiving way, a way that allows them to remain asleep. You turn their shadow into a manageable narrative. You make the unbearable bearable. You are the priest of their denial. And when you heal, you resign from that position. You stop performing absolution. You stop taking confession from those who never change. You stop granting forgiveness to those who do not repent. Not because you become bitter, but because your soul becomes honest. This honesty is not an opinion, It is a spiritual event. For the first time, you feel in your body what truth feels like. It is not loud, it is not rage, it is a cold clarity, and it has weight. It makes you slow, it makes you selective, it makes you nearly intolerant of distortion, especially the sweet distortions you used to call love. And here we touch a difficult idea. The healed empath becomes slightly dangerous, not in the vulgar sense of aggression, but in the sacred sense of boundaries. Your energy ceases to be universally accessible. Your compassion is no longer an open tap for anyone who arrives thirsty. You learn the difference between thirst and entitlement. You learn the difference between suffering and parasitism. You begin to recognize that certain people did not love your heart. They loved your permeability. They loved your lack of edges. They loved your availability because it allowed them to remain unaccountable. They loved that you would always return, always explain, always soften the confrontation with tenderness. But the healed empath does not return the way you used to. You no longer return to prove your goodness. You no longer return to reduce their guilt. You no longer return because you fear being misjudged. This is the deeper healing, the liberation from your own moral performance. Many empaths do not realize how much of their kindness was an attempt to be safe from shame. They believed that if they were good enough, loving enough, understanding enough, they would finally deserve peace. But peace is not earned through self-sacrifice. Peace is not the reward for being mistreated with grace. Peace arrives when you stop negotiating with your own abandonment. And now, in this internal revolution, archetypes begin to move. The psyche speaks in patterns older than your biography. The empath is often possessed by the archetype of the wounded healer, but also by something more subtle, the archetype of the good child, the redeemer, the suffering servant. In myth, these figures are noble, but in modern psychological life, they can become prisons, they can become the ego strategy to avoid power. You might have learned very early that power is dangerous. Perhaps power belonged to someone else, the parent who raged, the caregiver who controlled, the authority who punished. So your psyche learned to equate power with harm, and your soul, sensitive and moral, chose the opposite. I will never be like them. You tried to be light in a dark house. You tried to be gentle where others were harsh. This is beautiful, but it becomes tragic when your avoidance of their darkness causes you to avoid your own strength. A healed empath does not remain trapped in goodness. This sentence alone will disturb those who have turned their sensitivity into identity. But I must insist, goodness without wholeness is not virtue. It is fear wearing a halo. It is the ego saying, if I am always kind, no one can accuse me. If I am always understanding, no one can abandon me. If I am always forgiving, I never have to confront my anger. Yet anger, when integrated, is not cruelty. Anger is the soul's immune system. It is the psyche's alarm bell. It says, something is wrong. It says, you have been invaded. It says, your boundary has been crossed. In the unhealed empath, anger often turns inward and becomes depression, exhaustion, self-blame. In the healed empath, anger becomes information. It becomes a compass. So what does the healed empath truly become? Not an angel, not a saint, not a savior. The healed empath becomes an individuated being, one who belongs to the self more than to the crowd's expectations. You become less easily guilted. You become less easily manipulated by emotional performance. You begin to sense the difference between genuine sorrow and strategic remorse. And this discernment is not cynicism, it is spiritual maturity. One of the most uncomfortable truths is that healing makes you less emotionally available to those who have not met themselves. This is not arrogance, this is instinct. A healed empath no longer enters spaces where the unconscious is ruling the room. You can still love people, but you stop living inside their chaos. You can still feel compassion, but you stop making it your job to absorb their poison. Many of you have been trained by family, by partners, by friends to become a kind of emotional sewage system. People dump their unresolved complexes into you, and because you are sensitive, you process what they refuse to process. You metabolize their pain. You alchemize their darkness. You carry their projections, and you call this love. But the psyche has a limit. The body has a limit. Eventually, something deep inside you says, enough. And when this enough awakens, it does not negotiate. It does not ask permission. It does not justify itself. It simply closes the door. This is why so many people are shocked when the empath finally changes. They were never prepared for your no. They were only prepared for your I understand. They were only prepared for your softening. They were only prepared for the endless second chances. But the healed empath is no longer a home for what refuses to heal. Your kindness becomes conditional not on someone being perfect, but on someone being real. At this stage, dreams often change. Many sensitive individuals report that as they heal, their dream imagery becomes darker at first, not lighter. They think something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. What is happening is that the psyche is pulling the shadow closer. It is saying, now you can bear it. Now you can look. You may dream of basements, of locked rooms, of old houses with hidden corridors. You may dream of animals that frighten you: wolves, snakes, crows, creatures of instinct. These are not omens of evil. These are symbols of power that you abandoned. The snake is the life force, the libido, the transformative wisdom. The wolf is your capacity to protect yourself, to belong to your own pack, to stop being prey. The crow is the messenger between worlds, the intelligence of the shadow. The psyche begins to introduce you to what you feared becoming. And here is the paradox: healing does not remove darkness, it relocates darkness. The unhealed empath is haunted by other people's darkness. The healed empath becomes acquainted with their own. You stop being terrified of selfishness, because you discover that some selfishness is sacred. You stop being terrified of coldness, because you discover that some coldness is clarity. You stop being terrified of losing people, because you realize how many people were never truly with you. They were with your function. In the seminar room of your psyche, the old audience begins to leave. The old roles begin to dissolve, and you may feel loneliness. This loneliness is not proof that you made a mistake. It is proof that you are crossing the desert between persona and self. Most people turn back at this point. They miss the applause. They miss being needed. They miss being the good one. But the healed empath discovers something strange. Being needed is often a subtle form of bondage. It is being chained to other people's immaturity. It is being chained to their refusal to grow. Need is not love. Need is hunger. Love can include hunger, yes, but love must also include responsibility. Love must include reciprocity. Love must include the willingness to face oneself. And the healed empath becomes frighteningly uninterested in one-sidedness. You stop calling one-sidedness patience. You stop calling imbalance loyalty. You stop calling emotional labor devotion. You start to see your life as energy, not romantic energy, not mystical energy in a vague sense, but psychic energy, libido, your precious inner substance. You start to ask, where is my libido going? And you notice that for years it has gone into people who only take, it has gone into relationships where your sensitivity served as fuel for someone else's ego. It has gone into family systems where you played therapist rather than child. It has gone into workplaces where your empathy was exploited as free labor. It has gone into friendships that survive only because you keep bending. When you heal, libido returns to its rightful home, your own life. This is why healing often produces creativity. Suddenly you want to paint, you want to write, you want to build, you want to learn, you want to travel, you want to be alone not because you hate people, but because your soul is finally becoming audible. You were always hearing everyone else's voice. Now you hear yours. There is also a subtle shift in your face. Those who have healed often look less eager, less pleading, less apologetic. Their eyes become steadier. They stop trying to win. They stop trying to convince. They stop over explaining. And this is where the world becomes uncomfortable with you. Because a healed empath is harder to control. You are no longer hypnotized by tears. You are no longer hypnotized by anger. You are no longer hypnotized by charm. Your nervous system becomes wise. It can sense incoherence. It can feel the mismatch between words and energy. It can smell the lie beneath the compliment. And if you have been in relation with narcissistic dynamics, whether in family or romance, you will understand why healing triggers backlash. The narcissistic structure depends on your participation. It depends on your empathy not as love, but as supply. It depends on your constant self-doubt. It depends on your belief that you are responsible for their feelings. It depends on your reflex to repair. When you heal, you stop repairing what you did not break. You stop explaining what should be obvious. You stop taking accountability for another adult's emotional chaos. In that moment, the narcissistic structure collapses or escalates. Either they leave because you are no longer useful, or they attack because you are no longer controllable. And this is the uncomfortable truth that many spiritual teachings avoid. Healing does not always create harmony. Healing often creates separation. It reveals incompatibilities that were hidden by your self-abandonment. It exposes the fact that your old relationships were built on an imbalance you're giving, they're taking. But let us be careful. The healed empath does not become a judge. The healed empath becomes a witness. There is a difference. Judgment is reactive. Witnessing is rooted. When you witness, you do not need to punish. You do not need to prove. You simply see, and seeing is enough. Seeing changes you. Seeing ends the trance. I will tell you something that may shock you. The healed empath becomes less emotional. In the theatrical sense, you still feel deeply. Yes, but you stop drowning in feelings. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop worshipping chemistry. You stop confusing nervous system activation with destiny. Many unhealed empaths are addicted to emotional storms because storms feel like home. They confuse chaos with connection because connection in childhood often arrived through crisis. Healing teaches your body that calm is not boredom. Calm is safety. Calm is where real love can breathe. And so you begin to seek not the most intense, but the most coherent. You begin to value consistency more than passion. You begin to respect stable warmth more than dramatic affection. This can feel like death to the old you, because the old you lived for spikes of emotional reward, the old you survived on intermittent reinforcement, small moments of affection after long periods of neglect. This is how trauma bonds operate. The psyche becomes trained to chase the next crumb. The empath becomes a gambler in the casino of love. The healed empath leaves the casino. This leaving is not merely behavioral. It is archetypal. It is a shift from the maiden to the queen, from the child to the adult, from the one who waits to be chosen to the one who chooses. It is the emergence of an inner authority. An inner authority is deeply offensive to those who prefer you uncertain. At this point, you may ask, does healing make the empath cold? No, but it makes you sovereign, and sovereignty can look cold to those who were feeding on your warmth. Sovereignty means you belong to yourself. You no longer require permission to say no. You no longer require validation to trust your intuition. You no longer require a crisis to justify leaving. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of all. The healed empath becomes capable of disappointment without self-destruction. You finally accept that people may never understand you. They may misinterpret your boundaries. They may call you selfish. They may say you have changed. And for the first time, you do not collapse under those labels. You do not rush to correct the narrative. You do not sacrifice your truth to maintain their comfort. You allow them to have their story. You keep your soul. This is individuation. This is the painful birth of the self within the human being. It is not pretty. It is not marketable. It is not always kind, but it is real. And now, if you listen closely, you will sense something inside you that has been waiting a long time. It is not the wounded child. It is not the tired rescuer. It is something older and quieter. It is the part of you that does not need to be needed. The part of you that does not negotiate with disrespect. The part of you that can love and still leave. The part of you that can feel compassion and still protect your life. This is what you become, and the world will call it many things. Some will call it arrogance. Some will call it detachment. Some will call it betrayal. But the self calls it truth. When I speak of truth, I do not mean a thought that convinces you in the mind. I mean a recognition that settles in the bones. It is the kind of knowing that makes the old arguments inside you suddenly sound childish. Like echoes from a former life, you have spent years negotiating with yourself. You have spent years creating inner tribunals where you prosecute your instincts and defend other people's behavior. You have spent years attempting to understand what was never meant to be understood, because it was never meant to be humane. The healed empath is the one who finally stops trying to interpret cruelty as a puzzle. You stop turning emotional harm into a riddle that must be solved. You stop turning inconsistency into a spiritual test. You stop turning disrespect into a lesson. This is not bitterness. It is the maturation of perception. And it is at this stage that the psyche begins to reveal to you one of its most secret mechanisms. Your empathy, unintegrated, was not only a gift, it was also a defense. It was your way of leaving yourself without appearing to leave yourself. You could disappear into others while believing you were doing something noble. You could abandon your own needs while telling yourself you were being loving. Many sensitive people have never experienced the true terror of selfishness because they have never tried it. But let us be honest, the fear of selfishness in the empath is often the fear of being punished for existing. It is the dread of becoming too much because you were raised among those who treated your needs as inconvenient, your emotions as excessive, your longing as embarrassing. So you developed the most ingenious strategy. You became the one who has no needs. Or rather, you became the one who has needs only in disguise, needs that appear as service, needs that appear as care, needs that appear as endless giving. In this way, you could still be needed, still be loved, still be chosen, without ever openly claiming your own life. The empath identity often grows out of a holy bargain with fate. If I am useful enough, I will be safe. So our healing breaks this bargain, and when the bargain breaks, you feel exposed, as if you have walked into a room without clothing. You no longer have your old currency. You no longer have the role that guaranteed belonging. You are no longer the one who listens forever, the one who forgives instantly, the one who stays even when it hurts. You may look around and discover this is another uncomfortable truth, that many people do not know how to relate to you without your wounds. They do not know your wholeness. They have never met it. Their love was unconsciously addressed to the injured part of you. This recognition can create grief so deep it feels cosmic. Not only grief for others, but grief for yourself, for how long you were willing to suffer in exchange for a semblance of connection. And yet grief itself becomes a purification. In alchemical terms, this grief belongs to the nigredo, the blackening, the dissolving phase. It is the moment when the old personality structure, the old you, begins to rot so that something more real can form. You may feel as if you are losing your identity. You may fear that you are becoming empty, that you are becoming numb. But what is actually happening is subtler. You are becoming unhooked. You are withdrawing your psychic projections from people and situations. You are reclaiming the fragments of your soul you left scattered in every relationship where you had to shrink. The healed empath does not become numb. They become undeceivable. And this is where the world becomes difficult, because most social life depends upon small illusions. Human relationships often survive by not telling the whole truth. Families stay intact by not naming certain patterns. Friendships remain polite by not confronting the deeper resentments. Romantic bonds persist through selective blindness, but the healed empath begins to feel allergic to these unspoken contracts. You sense the lie before it is spoken. You detect the emotional manipulation behind the apology. You feel the pressure to perform agreement, and something in you refuses. It refuses not because you want conflict, but because your soul cannot tolerate betrayal anymore, not betrayal by others, but your own betrayal of your inner reality. This refusal is the birth of a new ethic. The old ethic was, be kind, even if it kills you. The new ethic becomes, be true, even if it costs you comfort. That is the true turning point. It is not an outward rebellion, it is an inner law that begins to govern you. And when this inner law awakens, you will notice that your nervous system changes. Your body becomes intelligent in a new way. It stops enduring what it once endured. It produces fatigue faster around certain people. It produces nausea in environments where you are being subtly gaslit. It produces headaches when you are forcing yourself to stay agreeable. Your body, which you once overrode in the name of love, begins to speak with authority. This is an aspect of healing that many do not consider. Healing is not only psychological insight. Healing is the restoration of the instinct. The empath, unhealed, often lives in the head. They analyze feelings instead of feeling them. They interpret sensation instead of honoring it. They are constantly thinking their way through life. But when healing begins, you descend back into the animal wisdom of the psyche. You become attuned to the simple signals, expansion and contraction, peace and dread, coherence and distortion. You begin to trust what your body has always known. In dreams, this may manifest as the return of primal imagery. You may dream of forests, of oceans, of storms. You may dream of standing at the edge of cliffs, of crossing bridges, of diving underwater. These symbols are not random. The psyche speaks in landscapes. Forests represent the unconscious, the wild, unstructured place where instinct lives. Oceans represent the collective psyche, the great field of emotions beyond your personal story. Storms represent transformation, confrontation, psychic weather shifting. Bridges represent transition. Cliffs represent thresholds. Water represents feeling that must be entered rather than avoided. When an empath heals, they often have dreams where they stop running. They finally turn around to face what chases them. That chasing figure is often the shadow, the disowned power.